So this is CJ Baker, and this is the ongoing history of protest music podcast. So this is the companion podcast to the website ongoing history of protestsongs.com. So today I got two special guests who make up 2/3 of the Americana trio, Lula Wiles. So by the time the episode will air, they will have released their latest album, Shame and Sedition, a follow-up to their exceptional 2019 album, What Would They Do? So maybe to begin with, I can get each of you to introduce yourselves one at a time.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Issa Burke. Happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Molly Obomosawin, a member of Lula Wiles, and I too am happy to be here. Thanks for having us, Chris.
Excellent. And maybe I'll just mention something because you may hear a little bit in my throat. So I did post an update on my website for regular visitors. I did spend a few days in the hospital, so it's non-COVID related, but if you see that I'm struggling a little bit, that's part of the reason why. So please just bear with me a bit. So we're doing this through Zoom. So of course we are social distancing. And then we mentioned have a new album that will be coming out, Shame and Sedition, which is based on a line in the song Television. So why did you choose Shame and Sedition as a title for the album?
Go for it, Molly.
Yeah, so I was really pushing for that as the title because it felt like it zeroed in on a couple of major, I guess, themes or concepts that are circling each other right now, and particularly the Western world, which is, colonizing nations, as it were. And, with, I guess, the tide of Black Lives Matter movement and liberation movements and, climate change as well, people talking about all these issues that are resulting from colonialism and global capitalism. The idea of shame is coming up a lot, especially for white folks, just sitting with that idea. And sedition, we wanted to introduce as a concept and sort of turn it on its head in settler colonies, right? The idea of falling in line under the authority is what folks are taught to do and reared to do from a very young age, right? And standing up against oppressive systems and oppressive legacies can be called sedition, right? And is sometimes called sedition by the government as a means of controlling the masses. So we wanted to really, we haven't talked about it too much in interviews. We haven't been asked about it too much. So I'm happy for the question, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And I feel like if I can expand on that a little bit, I feel like for a lot of the reasons that Molly's talking about, like I didn't totally get what the title meant at first. And I'm really glad that we ended up going with that because I feel like in so many ways, it really does encapsulate a lot of what this album is about. And I feel like the more we talked about it, the more I saw these threads running, even through like the less political songs on the record too. Yeah. Like I feel like a lot of the songs that are more about like various kinds of interpersonal relationships or like mental illness, we deal with that kind of internalized shame or shame in the context of a relationship, and the idea of sedition in like a more metaphorical sense too, of like rising up against whatever is not serving you. And obviously I think the political themes of the record, I think are at the forefront of what that title is about. But the more I've thought about it, the more I have felt like it applies to everything on the record as well.
It is something, I've only heard the first 3 singles so far. So Television, In Dreams, and Oh My God. But I know compared to the other album, which I would say was a very socially conscious album as well. But this album does seem to be more explicitly political. Mm-hmm. So am I correct in that assumption?
I think so. I think we've gotten better at talking about things directly better at understanding the world since even 2019, right? Or 2018 when we wrote the album.
For sure. Yeah, and I think also there's like, I feel like with this record, there's also, I think, a better integration of like the political and the personal than on our last record. I feel like in some of our previous material, there was like, we had the political songs and we had the heartbreak songs.
Oh.
And I feel like this record kind of brings those things together in a more cohesive way, which is so much more true to like the experience of being a person. Like the old saying, the personal is political, I think is really true. And that is a lot of what this record is about too, like the intersection of those things.
And you definitely have that intersection there. So I know, because I've talked to like a few artists that have been recording through the whole crazy time of the pandemic. So it seems like sometimes a band or an artist would have a certain album in mind to begin with, then direction of that album or the direction of the music ends up shifting. Is that the case with you guys at all, or is this basically the album that you intended to make?
That's a good question. Well, we wrote most of the album. Well, it's kind of half and half, isn't it, Issa?
I feel like, yeah, it's kind of half and half in terms of writing like pre-pandemic or post-pandemic or during pandemic, more accurately. And in some ways, I think you never really know what record you're going to make until you actually make it. And we did have some preconceived notions, like there were some songs on this record that we'd played a lot live. So we had some idea of how we wanted those to sound, but even those ended up changing a lot once we went in the studio. So I think we had ideas and we had goals and we had sounds that we wanted to explore. And we also had a lot of really amazing surprises as we worked on things in the studio. Absolutely. I think the fact that we didn't have a ton of time to play together beforehand also, I think, made it a lot more pleasantly surprising too.
Yeah. So all different various factors there. And I know an issue that you've addressed in your music a lot with, and I think you already mentioned the word colonialism. I know, Mally, this is a subject that, as an Indigenous person yourself, it's probably a subject that you have that personal connection with. I know that this is a topic that you've addressed a lot in both this album and on previous recordings. So why do you think this is a important topic to address?
Well, we're facing a lot of issues just as a human population right now. Climate change, maybe chief among them, but lots of social justice issues, economic justice issues, environmental justice. It really is. Colonialism was the thing that made all of those terrible atrocities blossom into being to the extent that they are now. And I think that in this time, it's really crucial that we address the root of the problem because the earth itself is, at risk. And, if we don't stop the constructs and the systems that were created by colonialism, right, including but not limited to extractive and pollutive industry and mass agriculture, right? But reaching as far as the prison industrial complex and obviously indigenous land dispossession being one of the first things, we're not going to solve the issue. We're not going to solve the climate crisis. We're not going to get out of it. We're going to continue to plummet into it, and all will go up in flames.
Yeah. I also want to add that I totally get why you said, Chris, that Molly has a personal connection to colonialism as an Indigenous person, but everyone has a personal connection to colonialism because it impacts all of us. Some of us benefit from it, but we're also all harmed by climate change. So I think that the more that white folks and other people who are privileged in various ways who benefit from colonialism can come to the realization oh yeah, this impacts me too. I am part of this. I benefit from this. I probably reinforce this in ways that I may not be aware of. And it's also hurting me because it
Yeah.
is what is causing climate change, which is hurting everyone. I think that's really important too, to be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's an important acknowledgement there. And it is a universal concern. Like obviously it's an issue in Canada, and in Canada we have the issues with pipelines and our track record with Indigenous people is not great. So it's something that could be definitely a universal concern there. So we mentioned facts. So these are issues I know you've been speaking out with for a while, but when you first started like making music, either together or on your own, have you always been attracted to music with a socially conscious message?
I think to some degree, yes. But it took me a while to learn to incorporate that into my songwriting. I think, I grew up in kind of the like Northeast folk music community where, people like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger were sort of held up as I was also like really into Ani DeFranco in high school. Like she's done a ton of that. So it was definitely something that was always like on my radar to some degree. And in recent years, kind of expanding my personal canon of protest music beyond just like white dudes and the occasional white woman. But I think for me, it took a while to really come into my like musical political voice.
Yeah.
For a long time, those two things were separate, and it's taken a while for me to learn to put them together. What are you, Molly?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I grew up playing a lot of folk music too, and instrumental music, mostly until I started with Lula Wiles, honestly, traditional folk music and jazz. And as an instrumentalist, I was, as a bass player, I was playing in these idioms where liberation and liberation theory and everything is a really central component to them, right? Especially in jazz and avant-garde movements and everything. And that was like my introduction in a lot of ways to music. And I've always been, I guess, politically aware to some extent that is inherent to my existence. But it took me a while to start, like Isa said, start putting that into song. And the big catalyst for me was the Standing Rock protests in 2016. It was when I started wanting to really write about stuff.
Okay. Even like when you study like the free jazz of like the 60s, like it has a definite political connection there.
For sure.
Yeah.
So of course we know there's 3 of you in the group. Is that ever present a challenge when someone wants to speak up on a certain topic? Is there ever a concern where one of the members is like, okay, maybe to back off a little bit?
I'll say we haven't ever had that kind of interaction, where someone wants to talk about something. I think it's been more candidly, to say this candidly, I think it's been more an issue of knowing how to talk about it.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. And like, I think speaking on behalf of the 2 white members of the band, just like the baseline level of ignorance about Indigenous issues that most white people have is so high.
Yeah.
And that's just been like a continuous learning process for us too. And as we've all kind of come into our political voices as musicians and as people, it's an ongoing process and is still ongoing during this interview and tomorrow and the day after.
So it's a process there. And has that ever been because I know I've interviewed like a bunch of individuals, and the fact that you record folk music, you probably have an audience who's more receptive to certain ideas to begin with. But has there been any kind of, sorry, just 1 second here.
Yeah, take your time.
Has there ever been any kind of like backlash from speaking out at any time? Or
I think
the occasional jerk. But
Yeah,
you go.
I think people are more emboldened online.
Yeah.
And I think people are emboldened in a really passive aggressive way in person, or like a thinly veiled way. We have had people, in the South, not that racists only exist in the South, but it happened to be in Arkansas. Like people walk out of our show when we started, going in a certain direction. But yeah, nothing like directly, violent and confrontational in the moment.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I think it is true that a lot of people in the folk world, even if like some of our personal politics might be more radical than the average folkie, I do think that people in the folk world are used to hearing that kind of thing. And so they are more receptive to it than people in, say, the country world. Like, I mean, some of my friends, or like even just people that I follow on social media that are in the more like mainstream country, like they get insane amounts of backlash for saying what I consider to be the like tamest middle of the road liberal takes. And I'm like, oh yeah, we scared all those people off long ago, so that's fine.
I will say, I just want to like continue on that though, like folks are more receptive, especially to hearing critiques about economic injustice as pertains to poor white people, I think. Yeah, totally. And, like that, like unionizing, like white, poor, some often rural thing is like it's pretty commonplace because of folks like Guthrie and Seeger, right? But really addressing the big topics of colonialism and the root causes and racism is a lot more uncomfortable in those spaces. And I'm grateful to my predecessors like Buffy St. Marie, but people didn't embrace or really understand what she was doing in a lot of spaces either, right? So it's a long way to go.
Yeah, apparently she was blacklisted, so.
Exactly. She was literally blacklisted in 2 countries.
Yeah.
At least that we know of.
Yeah.
So I guess the speaking out that's something that you just always been compelled to do that then.
I think so, yeah. But like the way we do it and the things we say and the ways that we engage with it totally evolve over time. But I think for me, and I think for Molly too, there has been a certain like political consciousness for each of us in very different ways, obviously, that has kind of always been there.
And another question I like to ask my guests, and we already mentioned a number of different artists. So we've already mentioned like the Woody Guthries and the Buffy St. Maries and the Pete Seegers. But is there any other musical influences that have inspired you that you haven't mentioned yet?
So many. Don't even know where to start. I mean, I feel like for me, a lot of my biggest formative influences, if I look back, were just like the people that I grew up around and the people at Maine Fiddle Camp, which is where we all started playing music together. I think one benefit of growing up in the folk music world is that it is so community centric. And so you are just interacting with, especially both my parents were musicians. Molly's dad is a musician too. So we just like had a lot of musicians around. And so I think for me, that was honestly one of my biggest influences, was just like starting to play music with people at Fiddle Camp and things like that. But in terms of more like formative musical influences that aren't people I know, Joni Mitchell is a big one. I don't know that that's necessarily like perceptible in my music. Like I don't really think my music sounds like Joni Mitchell, but I do find her music really inspiring, and it always makes me feel like I'm like getting closer to myself. And there, I mean, I could go on and on. There's like, I feel like a ton of specific influences that I think kind of pointed me in the direction that I was going on this album. Like I was listening to a lot of Neil Young at the time, which I think you can kind of hear in a lot of the guitar playing on the record. I don't know. Lots and lots.
Lots of influences.
Yeah. What about you, Molly?
Yeah, it's always such a hard question to answer, but like over time, some of the big ones, the Beatles.
Yeah.
You gotta have the
Yeah.
Beatles in there, especially because there's a song on the album that people just keep comparing to, just being like, oh, this woozy Beatles song, whatever.
Yeah.
But so,
It is fairly Beatley, I would say.
No, nothing wrong with that.
right, I'll take it. Charles Mingus, a really big one in terms
Okay.
of avant-garde sounds, bass playing, and lyrical commentary, I guess, when he does speak in his tracks. And Ornette Coleman, another one in that camp. And Randy Newman. They're all dudes for some reason. Rufus Wainwright, the legend.
We love Rufus Wainwright in this band.
Oh. He's
Yeah,
Canadian.
I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Fleetwood Mac, I don't know, the normals.
Yeah.
And it's good to have a wide range of influences.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you do it all on this album, but I know on your previous album, I also appreciate how you challenge some of like the old like folk idioms. Like, for example, you write like a murder ballad from the opposite perspective and stuff. And feel it's like, why do you feel it's important to do that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as folk music has evolved, especially as recorded music has evolved over the last 100 years, the idea of what folk music is has become this sort of like nostalgia, like costume music thing, which to me is like really antithetical to what folk music actually is. Like the whole point of folk music is that it evolves and that everyone who continues to be a practitioner of traditions, like you learn from the past and then you provide your own take on it. And I think people who are weirded out by that, to me, they do not understand what folk music is. And that's one thing that I really love about working with Smithsonian Folkways, is that they do kind of take that broad idea of what folk music is. Like they're releasing this really big, this massive collection of hip hop music right now as a statement that like hip hop is a style of American folk music. Because it developed in community as an expression of what communities were experiencing, and like that to me is the essence of what folk music is. So I feel like that's kind of the place that a lot of our music is coming from, whether it's got fiddles or electric guitars on it or both. That's where it's coming from for me, I think.
I agree. And I also think it's important, as we we observe these trends in folk music that's, being made today, right, with the like backward looking lens. We're watching that happen. And we're also trying to be really critical of the narratives that are presented, because people do learn from pop culture and people learn from culture, even if it's not, folk culture, I guess, whatever. But we want to be, we're wrestling with a lot of those narratives. We're wrestling with the fact that all the murder ballads are about killing women and it's like this glorification. And we're wrestling with the fact that all these, Western songs, right, are about killing Indians. So we want an anti-colonial Western and we want a feminist murder ballad, you gotta, make the pot better.
Because you remind me of, like I was having, like on one of my podcast episodes, started talking about Woody Guthrie, and This Land Is Your Land came up, which is, of course, considered an iconic song. The person I was interviewing, his name's Time, he's a rapper and a journalist. He mentioned his issues with that song because of the colonialism aspect, which I kind of was like, oh yeah, it's something I've never really thought about before.
Yeah, I actually wrote a really long essay about that for Folklife magazine. Yeah.
It's a great essay. Everyone should read it.
I probably need to check that out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I think that's a good thing with folk music, because even when we talked about Woody Guthrie, This Land Is Your Land was a response song.
Right, exactly. And it's so important to talk about how the greater movement for like unions and for like abolishing private property and for the rights of poor people, right? These are all really important topics, but he just had that classic amount of, white ignorance that's even in activist movements, right? And that's what my essay is really about.
Right.
It's like, you're almost there. Just
Yeah,
got to get a little
exactly.
bit deeper down to the root.
And it's like, it's no surprise really that like those lyrics are the ones that survived, and all of these other more radical verses people often forget about. Like, why do we think that is?
But I think it's important, like, just to, candidly continue this conversation, like, in the folks who are listening to our new album and like even the like reviews that we've already had, a lot of white reviewers will connect a lot more easily with the material that is like pro unions and like economic rights that are race blind and like, or whatever, right? Just like not directly addressing these things, either because they don't personally connect with the anti-colonial narratives, or because they don't really pick up on what the lyrics are, right? And so it's like, it's just a mark of the systemic issue of the blind spots against, intentionally created blind spots against Native people.
Yeah.
So I definitely enjoyed our discussion. Before we conclude, is there anything else you would like to plug or say?
Listen to the record, buy the record.
Yeah, buy it from Bandcamp so we get the money directly. And
And I guess first Friday of the month, possibly.
I know. I hope they keep doing those.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely, because I know that's frustrating being an indie artist.
Definitely.
Trying to fight for those crumbs.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was hard enough before all the gigs got canceled. Yeah.
So,
well, anyway, thank you for having us, Chris.
Yeah, no worries.
A lot of really, really great questions.
Thanks. And because you mentioned gigs, is anything starting to open up yet, or?
A little bit. We're going to be doing a couple handfuls of like outdoor shows this summer, and a little bit into the fall. So people can keep an eye on our social media and our website, and we'll start announcing those soon.
Okay, excellent. So I encourage everyone to check out Shame and Sedition, which will be out by the time that this podcast out. So thanks again. I enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks
for
Chris.
having us.
Have a good night.